One of the few things I liked about my RV before I drove it to its death was that it was well insulated. So even in the desert, when it would get to 90 degrees during the day and 40 at night, it was always somewhere near the middle of that range inside, even without the heater or AC. One of the first things you should do when building a camper van is to insulate it, and insulate it well. There are dozens of opinions on how to do this, and everybody will tell you that their way is the only correct way. What this means is there's not one correct way to do this, but several, certainly several that are correct enough for what most people are doing. I'm going to talk about most of these approaches and about how I insulated my van, and why my way is the only correct way. RVs and camper vans have a lot of power requirements. My last RV tried to meet all of these requirements with a gas generator and a single lead-acid battery, and it was the worst. So much so that I drove it off a cliff. Sometimes I need 12 volts, sometimes 120, sometimes I want to run it on solar, sometimes on shore power, and I don't really want to build a complicated system of wiring and components. So I shopped around, I picked Bluetti, and I reached out to them to see if they wanted to sponsor the channel. They said yes, and also that they have a new, better power station available soon. The new Bluetti Apex 300 has an integrated 2.7 kilowatt hour battery and can output over 3.8 kilowatts at 120 or 240 volts. And with the Hub D1, you can output up to 50 amps of 12 volt power through an Anderson plug. So for a lot of campers, you can just plug it right into your existing system. It charges from the 12 volt outlet on your van or tow vehicle, and also has a solar charge controller that can accept up to 2400 watts of solar. So this is a solution to all of my power needs in the van. AC power consumption is very low, about a third of similar competitors. This means you can run low power devices like a Starlink or a CPAP without wasting a bunch of power just keeping the inverter going. It's great for the van, but I got this power station for two reasons. I want emergency power for my house. This can easily be moved from the van to the house to power anything I need it to. I could weld race car parts while the power is out. Also, the Apex 300 will allow you to charge it with 120 volts while you're using 240 volts. This will be great for the van and the house, but it's all in a package that can be loaded up and taken just about anywhere. I can also upgrade the system with extra batteries if needed, up to 6 per unit, in case I want to add a fridge, air conditioning, and a washer and dryer unit to my van, which I might. Also, if I ever want to expand to home solar and backup, I could add units and batteries as needed, getting all the way up to 58 kilowatt hours and 30 kilowatts of input. If you're looking at powering your van or RV or starting a home backup system, click the link in the description and check out the new Bluetti Apex 300. The second law of thermodynamics states that heat will flow from hot places to cold places, and we are here today to break the law. Maybe not break it, just slow it down. Eventually, the warmth inside your van will make it to the cold outside. The trick here is to slow that down so you don't have to have your crappy propane heater on full blast all night. The way you slow down that heat transfer is with insulation, material that is designed to resist the conductive flow of heat. Here's how insulation works. Air is a pretty good insulator. Kind of. Heat travels quickly through solids like metals, but it travels much slower through air. Unfortunately, air moves, so if you have a large pocket of air, this side gets hot air rises, cool air backfills this space, and pretty soon heat is traveling quickly through the air because of convection. But if you make the air pockets really small, the air can't move around as much, you don't get convection, and the air becomes a pretty good insulator. On top of that, heat doesn't transfer from a solid to a gas as easily as it does from a solid to another solid. The gas has some resistance to heat flow, and the solid has some resistance, but the interface between the two also has some added resistance. This works the other way as well. So if you have thousands of air pockets trapped in a fabric or foam, then you have thousands of extra tiny resistances to heat transfer. This is how most insulation works. It traps an enormous amount of tiny air pockets. The more air pockets you trap and the tinier they are, the better the insulation. In construction materials, this resistance is quantified with what's called the R value. Higher R value, better insulation. Lower R value, worse insulation. You can find no shortage of charts showing different R values of all sorts of materials. The first thing you will notice is that sheet metal and glass have terrible R values. Your empty van is a bad insulator. The good news is that basically anything you do will have a noticeable effect. You could duct tape old t-shirts to the walls and be noticeably better off. So you just buy whatever material has the highest R value, jam it into the cavities of your walls, and call it good, right? No. There are other considerations, cost being the most obvious, but you also have to consider water absorption and mold growth, ease of installation, and less quantifiable things like how terrible fiberglass is to work with. Note that R value depends on the thickness of the material, so if something has a very high R value, it might just be a foot thick, which doesn't really help for a van where space is limited. When I bought this van, it came with a padded floor that had what looks like recycled denim on the bottom side. I threw it in the backyard for a few days after I took it out and it got rained on. It soaked up water like a sponge and it started to grow what looks like mold. I had considered keeping this and shoving it into those large empty cavities for free insulation, but this does highlight the problem with denim and a lot of other insulation. It soaks up water. While it's probably not going to rain inside your van, if your insulation is doing its job, you will have condensation. If it's cold outside and there's something hot going on inside, condensation will form on the walls. Also, if you use a propane heater, you will get lots of condensation. If you use an insulation that soaks up water and it's hiding in dark hidden spaces in your van, you will get mold growing, and your van will stink like mold and be a general health hazard to be in. You can get recycled denim insulation that's treated with things like borate to inhibit growth of things like mold. Sometimes people will try to wrap the insulation in plastic to make it waterproof, but that's just asking for a tear and a bag full of wet mildew. Another consideration is flammability. While it's nice to be toasty warm inside on a cold day, you probably don't want to be on fire. So you probably don't want to use insulation that burns easily or quickly. Remember that oven I made in my garden a while back? That was made using polyisocyanurate, which I will henceforth refer to as polyiso. Polyiso is great. It has a super high R value, it has exceptional mold resistance, it resists water absorption, it doesn't catch fire, and it's pretty inexpensive. Unfortunately, it's not great at another important quality of insulation: installation. Insulation installation. You have to fit this stuff inside your van somewhere, usually in cavities and walls that are hard to get to, so fitting a fat sheet of rigid foam in is difficult or impossible. Polyiso in particular has another drawback, and that is that its R value decreases as the temperature drops below 50 Fahrenheit. So the colder it gets, the less well it works. If you walk around your local hardware store, you will see a few different kinds of insulation. Most of these are not great for a van. One good one is expanded polystyrene. These are those big foam boards you see in pink or blue depending on your chosen store. They have a little lower R value than polyiso, but not by much, and in colder weather they outperform it. The major drawback of these, and really the only drawback, is the same with polyiso. They're rigid, so you can't stuff them in small cavities and you can only bend them a little bit. But they are perfect for things like ceilings and floors, or if you have them, flat walls. It is flammable, but it has additives that make it slower burning and self-extinguishing. If you have a lot of flat walls, just use this stuff. Denim has the problems we talked about before, water absorption being the big one. Fiberglass insulation won't absorb water, but it will hold it and can lead to mold growth. More importantly, fiberglass sucks to work with. Anybody who has crawled around in an old attic or built a fiberglass race car body knows that fiberglass is the worst. I don't even want to talk about it anymore. That's how much I don't want to deal with fiberglass insulation. Closed cell spray foam is a pretty good insulator, doesn't hold water, it's not very flammable, but it is kind of expensive. It's great for small nooks and holes, and for me, the whole floor, but I'll get to that in a minute. A lot of people like wool. It has good insulation properties, it's not flammable, and it is environmentally friendly. The water and mold resistance is debated and probably depends on the specific wool you get, but it does tend to sag, which could be a problem in a van that's moving and shaking down the highway. Also, it has a distinct smell that has been described as agricultural, especially if it gets wet. I went with 4 different kinds of insulation for my van, different kinds for different areas. Most of the van is using 3M Thinsulate. Thinsulate is really good in every important area of insulation performance. It has a high R value, doesn't soak up water, resists mold and fire, and you can conform it into tight pockets. It also has great sound insulating properties, which is important to me. People talk about cost being high, but it's not that expensive, especially compared to other flexible insulation with a similar R value. The reason Thinsulate works so well as an insulator is because it has a higher density of smaller fibers, so it's really good at trapping air in small pockets. This is probably a good place to note that insulation that can be compressed is way less effective when it is compressed, because you lose all of those air pockets. So don't cram it in there and squish it. Let it be fluffy. The other 3 types of insulation I used are that pink expanded polystyrene, 2-part expanding closed cell foam, and some adhesive foam pad, mostly because I just had it lying around. Some of you who have been with the channel for a long time remember the Jag. I still have the Jag. I should probably do something with that. Well, I got sound deadening stuff for that, and I had a bunch left over. While this is not insulation, the first thing that I did, and the first thing I recommend you do, is to stick on some vibration damping mat. This is just a heavy, sticky rubber that keeps your metal panels from vibrating and turning your van into a big bass drum. It's not going to help your thermal insulation, but you do need to put it on before your insulation goes in, so this is the first step for me. You only need to cover about 1/4 of the surfaces, mostly the large flat panels, but you might also want to completely cover the wheel arches. Bonus points if you can convince a bunch of friends to do it for you while you film them. Just be ready for them to put dicks everywhere. The second step is the area above the cab. This is a big exposed area getting a lot of direct sunlight on hot days and letting lots of heat out on cold nights. This could have been fixed with some Insulate and spray adhesive, but I got this big 2-part closed cell foam spray for the next step that we will talk about in a minute, and I had a lot more than I needed. So we taped off the cabin area and I just sprayed foam all over the ceiling. By the way, don't do this in a t-shirt and no mask unless you want to have bits of foam stuck to your arm and face for a week. Spray foam might not be a bad idea for larger open panels on your van that you're going to cover with trim. It's messy and it'll never come off, but installation is a breeze. Although if you have a lot of flat-ish panels, I just use that pink foam. The problem I ran into is that when we put the interior trim back on, it wouldn't fit because I had too much foam in some places, so I got out the angle grinder and took care of it. Overall, not bad, although if I was doing this again, I would just use the Insulate. The next step is the floor, and this is a challenge. I am 6 feet tall and the inside of my van is just barely taller than that, and I don't want to hunch over in the van. So anything I add to the floor needs to be super thin. Also, the floor is ribbed, which means I can't just throw down a 1/2 inch of expanded polystyrene and just put plywood on top of that. I could cut out strips of foam of different thicknesses, 1/4 inch for the top of the ribs and thicker for the valleys below, except the valleys are all different heights in different areas, and none of the thicknesses correspond to a readily available foam board. I did see a few people spray down expanding foam and then set down a board with weight on top of it to keep it flat. This seems like an okay idea if you have 1,200 pounds of bricks lying around. The coolest idea I saw was to glue down some wood strips to the top of some of the ribs, spray the whole thing with that expanding foam, and then use this awesome tool to grind away the foam. It bounces off the top of the wood strips but completely tears up the foam as it goes, so you end up with a nice flat layer. The only problem is this tool is $2,000, but I bet I could make it for $200. Not sure exactly how this tool works, but it looks like just a barrel with some nubs sticking out every so often. I could probably 3D print this, but it does look metal, so maybe send cut send is the answer here. This is what I came up with. This is a 3/8 inch thick piece of steel with a nub on each side, a bunch of holes around the perimeter, and one big hole in the middle. I had send cut send laser me out 50 of these guys, and then we stacked them together using a center all-thread rod and a couple of smaller rods on either side to keep the random orientation of all the nubs. I glued down 1/4 inch thick strips of wood on top of some of the ridges for my cheese grater of death to skim across the top of. I 3D printed a handle for one side with a bearing in it, and I chucked the other side up to a 90-degree drill. This is either going to save me $2,000 or cost me my hand. Excellent. Although it does make a huge mess. We went through 3 full vacuum cleaners of foam. Aside from the mess, there really was only one major drawback to this, and that was because I wanted to go so thin on the floor. The foam started to chunk out as I got near to the bottom in some places. This is the top of the ridges that don't have wood glued on. I think if I went with thicker wood strips, even just a little bit, I probably wouldn't have this problem. Overall though, not bad. I said there was one drawback, but there's really 2. The other one is that with my 90-degree drill and bearing handle, I couldn't get up to the edge of the wall like you can with a more expensive tool. So I needed a solution for the edges. This is fine because I still want to be able to get to the tie downs in the floor in case I want to secure something in the back. So I decided to solve this problem with my bamboo H2D. With some quick measurements, I drew up some simple platforms with bolt hole cutouts to fill out the rest of the floor. I did 3D scan this to get the measurements, but you could draw this out with a tape measure pretty quickly. Plastic is a decent insulator on its own, but the cool thing about using the bamboo for these is that 3D printers print partial infills, which leave lots of little air pockets in them, just like those other insulation materials. So it's kind of accidentally a great solution for this, especially if you use the right infill. I got a little fancy with these. I made the bottoms into a bunch of little pyramids so there would be less area for solid conductive heat transfer. This adds more little air pockets at the bottom to make these even better insulators. We did glue them down with a couple of splotches of adhesive so they don't move around and make noise. By the way, this spray insulation is pretty expensive, almost $400, and while I did save a bunch of money not buying this thing, my cheese grater of death was still over $200. Also, the whole theme of this build is minimum effort, and this is way past minimum effort. I do this a lot, overcomplicate things. It's probably going to happen again. If I were going to do this over, here's what I'd do. Remember before when I said that because the floor was ribbed, I couldn't just throw down expanded polystyrene and put plywood on top of that? Well, I probably could have done that. It would have squished the polystyrene in some areas, but there are enough ribs to where it wouldn't deform too much with the load spread out on the plywood above it. I'd do a test run first with some foam and plywood to check, but I imagine this would work just fine. You may have noticed the dangling foam turds hanging from the ceiling. Well, that giant 2-part foam tank I bought had lots of foam in it, so I used it to seal up some random hard-to-reach cavities, and also the bridging of the metal inside. You can do this with cans of foam as well, you don't need to buy the big thing. The expansion of the foam is no joke. If you go really crazy with this stuff, it can deform the body panels, but with a little bit of it, you can insulate hard-to-reach places. Just make sure you're not going to want to run any wiring or anything through here in the future, because this stuff is in there forever. Also, it should be noted that you don't really need to do this. If you've insulated 90% of your van walls, then you have a well-insulated van. The last 10% is not going to make a huge difference. But if you're camping in very cold or very hot places, it might be worth it. And if you have the foam, you might as well make some turds. The bulk of the insulation in this van is that 3M Thinsulate stuff. I bought 200 square feet for about $300, but I only needed about half of it. I ended up using most of it because I had it, but those estimates on websites are overshooting by a bit. You can cut up and shove this stuff into all sorts of tight places, which is nice. You do need to stick it to the wall, however, so it doesn't sag down. To do that, you'll need some 3M Super 90 or something similar. The ceiling got 3 different kinds of insulation, 4 if you count the front that had that foam blast. I had some Dynaliner left over from the Jag build. This is an adhesive, sound deadening, and heat insulating pad. I wouldn't have used it if I didn't already have it, but it is there. Over that, I stuck some of that pink foam. The ceiling does have an arch to it, but with that Super 90 spray, it sticks just fine. I wouldn't trust it long term, but eventually I will put in a ceiling that holds everything up. On the edges of the pink foam, I cut out rectangles of more Thinsulate to fill it out. There are 3 modes of heat transfer, and so far we've really only talked about conduction, which is just heat wiggling its way through atoms. The other 2 modes are radiation and convection. Convection is easy. Buy a fan. A lot of vans and RVs have big max air fans in the ceilings. I don't have one, but I will figure out some way to get airflow through this van, because it is important not only for comfort, but for preventing that mold growth that loves to find dark and damp places. As for radiation, this is significant when you're trying to keep cool on a hot day. All of the sun's energy reaches us through radiation, and it will make it all the way through the atmosphere and into the giant roof of your van that makes a great solar energy capture area. This is why you want to make sure to well insulate the roof of your van. What you also might want to do is buy solar panels. These won't technically insulate your van, but they do shade the roof. On a hot sunny day, they will make a significant difference in how much heat energy makes it into your van. I got 800 watts of solar panels, which is a lot, but the panels were on sale. They are a little older and less efficient, but 800 watts is more than I need, and this way I get all the shade. There is added cost with solar, of course. There is the batteries and the solar charge controller, or a power station, like the Bluetti Apex 300 I got for this build. By the way, I know the Bluetti ad is spilling into the rest of the video, but this is one of the reasons why I wanted to get this thing. It's pretty handy. In any case, if you plan on getting solar anyway, it might make sense to get less efficient, cheaper panels just for the shade. Another thing you'll want to do is get reflective window covers. Some auto manufacturers will add layers in the glass to help keep radiant heat down, but even then, a lot of heat comes in or goes out through the window. Even simple covers will help a lot. A lot of people talk about thermal bridging. You have this metal inside and a metal bridge to the exterior skin of the vehicle, so heat can conduct through that bridge. The only way around this is to add insulation on top of the exposed metal in the van, which digs into the interior space. There are some people who have done tests showing that thermal bridging doesn't contribute too much to heat transfer, which vibes with my intuition, and I don't want to do it anyway, so that's good enough for me. One last thing, there's a lot of talk about vapor barriers. If you've taken the door off of your car, you probably noticed a plastic sheet glued to the inside of the door. This is a vapor barrier. It's here because things like the door handle have passageways to the outside, and you can get moisture inside the outer part of your door. Auto companies will add this barrier to keep that moisture on the outside. Some people will tell you that you should add this vapor barrier over the insulation inside your van to keep the moisture from getting in. But the thing about vapor barriers in cars is that they always have a passageway to the outside, so you don't just trap a lot of moisture in there. On top of that, they're not filled with fibers that love to trap moisture and harbor microbes. There are strong opinions about this, but it's my opinion that you should not use a vapor barrier over insulation. I did do this though. There are 2 areas in my van that have vapor barriers from the factory, and I removed those barriers to add insulation, and then I put the barrier back on. This could be a problem, but some of the videos I've seen show the Thinsulate to be pretty good at repelling moisture, so I'm going to give it a try and I'll keep a nose out for any funky smells. You may have noticed that I left this panel without any insulation on it. This is because I am planning on making a bump out so I can sleep sideways. But for now, it will be an excellent way to tell if my insulation is working. I put 2 separate space heaters in the back, both on full blast, hooked up to the Bluetti, pumping out nearly 2.7 kilowatts of heat. This was a cool morning, which gave me a chance to take out my thermal camera and see how well my insulation was working. And it looks great. There are 2 big spots of heat loss, the panel that I didn't insulate and the front window. There's also a decent amount of heat coming out of the back. I didn't get any insulation in the upper part of the rear doors, and the rear structure has a big empty cavity that I might fill with some expanding foam. The wheel arch also has some heat transfer, so I'll need to cover that. And on the right side, you can see that I forgot to insulate the lower part of the rear door, and I still need to add some of my extra insulation into some areas. But compared to the before image, you can easily tell that the insulation is doing a great job. Thanks for watching. Used to be that you had to impress people to get people to watch your show, but now all you have to do is impress the algorithm. So do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. It actually helps the channel a lot. And of course, all hail the algorithm.